remember the freedom of childhood. Before smartphones and social media took over our lives, we had the night. We had our bikes, our friends, and that invincible feeling that nothing bad could ever happen to us. But I learned the hard way that the world isn't safe just because you're a kid. I remember the specific silence of a park at night. It's peaceful until you realize you aren't the only one there. Tonight, I'm going to tell you 3 stories from my life. From a voice calling out, from an empty playground slide, to a stalker who waited in the shadows for weeks, to a night in the woods where my friends and I were hunted like animals. These aren't ghost stories I read online. These are the nights that stripped away my feeling of safety forever. Listen closely, because you never know who is watching you from the tree line. I want to take you back to a time that feels like a completely different lifetime now. I'm talking about the days before smartphones became an extension of our hands, before social media dictated how we interacted with the world, and before we were all constantly connected. I'm talking about the days when being a kid meant you actually had to go outside to have fun. Maybe it's just where I live now, or maybe the world has truly changed fundamentally, but I simply don't see kids riding their bikes in packs anymore. I don't see them playing ding-dong ditch or exploring the neighborhood until the streetlights hum to life, signaling that it's time to head home. But when I was growing up, specifically between the ages of 9 and 17, my entire life existed outdoors. My childhood home was situated in what felt like the absolute perfect location for a group of adventurous kids. Just down the block from my house, there was a park. Now, this wasn't just a playground. It was our sanctuary. It was the place we claimed as our own territory, especially at night when the rest of the world was asleep. You know how it is when you're that age. Parents get annoyed if you have 6 loud teenagers crashing in the basement, so we would inevitably migrate outside. This park was geographically perfect for us. It was tucked away, bordered by a dark, dense forest and a patch of unmanaged woods on 3 sides, isolating it from the nearby homes. The 4th side faced the street, but even across that street there was just another stretch of dark, thick woods. It was a pocket of isolation in the suburbs, which meant we could be as loud as we wanted without neighbors peeking through their blinds or calling the cops on us for noise complaints. The events I'm about to tell you in this true scary story happened when I was exactly 13 years old. That is a specific age, a transition point between being a child and a teenager, where you feel invincible, like nothing in the world can hurt you. It was a Saturday night. I remember the air being crisp, the kind of night where the wind feels good against your face, a perfect autumn chill. We had spent the earlier part of the evening riding our bikes to a local pizza place, stuffing our faces with cheap slices and soda. Afterward, we drifted back to my friend Tony's house. There were 6 of us that night. We were hanging out in Tony's backyard, probably shouting over each other, laughing at stupid jokes, and just being loud kids. We completely lost track of time until the back door swung open and Tony's mom stepped out. She didn't look happy. She gave us the classic ultimatum that every teenager has heard. You guys are being way too loud. Either be quiet, go home, or go hang out somewhere else. It was late, but not late enough to call it quits. 3 of our friends decided to head home, tired from the day. But me, Tony, and our friend Rob, we weren't ready for the night to end. The adrenaline of the weekend was still kicking in. We looked at each other and made a decision that would lead to a terrifying experience and changed the way I looked at the dark forever. We decided to ride to the park. It was a short ride, maybe 5 minutes max. I can still vividly remember the feeling of that ride. There is something hypnotic about riding a bike at night in the suburbs. The rhythmic whirring of the tires on the asphalt, the pools of orange light from the street lamps passing overhead, the silence of the sleeping houses. It felt relaxing. It felt safe. We had no idea we were riding straight into one of those supernatural encounters that you usually only see in movies. When we arrived at the park, it was completely empty, just as we expected. Let me describe the layout so you can picture this creepy encounter perfectly in your mind. Beyond the woods that hugged the perimeter, the park itself had a small baseball diamond that looked eerie under the moonlight, a set of cold metal bleachers, a few typical park benches, and a decent-sized playground area. The playground had everything: a swing set, climbing bars, and a large wooden structure with elevated platforms. We ditched our bikes in the grass and climbed up onto the playground structure. We always sat on the highest platform. It felt like a watchtower. We were just sitting there, dangling our legs over the edge, talking about school, video games, girls, nothing important. The atmosphere was calm. The only sounds were the wind rustling the dead leaves in the surrounding woods and the occasional distant car passing by on the main road. We had been there for maybe 20 minutes when the vibe shifted instantly. It went from a peaceful hangout to a real nightmare in the blink of an eye. Tony, who was sitting closest to the slide entrance, suddenly went rigid. He held up a hand, signaling us to stop. "Shh, did you guys hear that?" he whispered. I stopped talking mid-sentence. We all froze. We sat there in the darkness, straining our ears, waiting. For a few seconds, there was nothing but the wind. I looked at Tony, ready to make a joke, asking him if he was hearing things or trying to scare us with haunted stories. Tony shook his head, looking genuinely confused and unsettled. He whispered that he thought he heard a footstep, a heavy, deliberate thump right there on the playground structure with us. Not on the ground, but on the wooden planks we were sitting on. Naturally, we were skeptical. We pulled out our cheap little flashlights and scanned the area. We looked over the railings, shone the lights down the slide, and checked the ladder. Nothing. The beams of light just caught dust motes floating in the air. "You're crazy, man," Rob said, laughing nervously, trying to break the tension. We settled back down, trying to recapture the relaxed mood, but the silence that followed was heavier. We were hyper-aware now. Every rustle of a leaf sounded like a footstep. And then a few minutes later, the silence broke again. Thud. We all heard it this time. My stomach dropped. It was a distinct, heavy sound, like a boot hitting the wooden decking of the playground. And it came from the other side of the structure, near the spiral slide. We jumped up. The instinct to fight or flight started to kick in, but curiosity kept us there. We walked around the platform, peering into the shadows. "Is someone there?" I called out. My voice sounded small and pathetic in the open air. No response, just the rustling trees. We looked at each other. We were 3 teenage boys, usually full of bravado, but we were unsettled. We were almost certain someone else was there, hiding, messing with us. We did a full sweep this time. We jumped down to the ground, walked around the perimeter of the playground, checked under the platforms. Empty, absolutely empty. We convinced ourselves it had to be an animal. Maybe a raccoon fell off the roof of the slide. We tried to laugh it off. We climbed back up, but we sat closer together this time. We waited. And then the night took a turn from simply unsettled to paranormal levels of terrifying. It started with a sound from the slide. The slide was one of those enclosed spiraling plastic tubes. You couldn't see inside it from where we were sitting. From the depths of that tube, a sound echoed up. It wasn't a thump, it wasn't an animal, it was a voice. It was a child's voice. That was the most disturbing part of this unexplained mystery. In the dead of night, in a deserted park surrounded by woods, a voice drifted up from inside the plastic tube of the slide. It was soft, high-pitched, and incredibly clear. It said, "Hello." I felt the blood drain from my face. I looked at Tony and Rob. Their eyes were wide, reflecting the same pure terror I was feeling. We had been sitting there for half an hour. We had walked around the structure. We knew for a fact that no one had climbed up the ladder. No one had walked past us. The thumping sounds we heard earlier hadn't come from the slide. They came from the platform. But the voice was inside the tube. I don't know what possessed me to speak back. Maybe it was the older brother instinct in me, thinking that if it really was a child, they might be in trouble. Maybe a toddler had wandered off and gotten stuck. I walked slowly toward the mouth of the slide. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I thought they could hear it. I leaned toward the opening. Is someone in there?" I stammered. A pause. Then the voice replied, cheerful and terrifyingly innocent. "Hello?" It sounded like a boy, maybe 3 or 4 years old. I was 90% sure that's what I heard. This felt like one of those true ghost stories you hear about, but it was happening to me. I swallowed hard. "Do you need help? Are you stuck?" Silence. I waited. 5 seconds, 10 seconds, nothing. I turned to my friends. "I have to check," I whispered. "What if a kid is hurt?" I sat down at the top of the slide. The darkness of the tube seemed to go on forever. I took a deep breath, expecting that at any moment my feet would bump into a small child curled up in the curve of the plastic. I pushed off. I slid down, bracing for impact. I went around the first curve, nothing. The second curve, nothing. I shot out the bottom and landed in the mulch. I scrambled to my feet and spun around to look back up the slide. It was empty. I frantically scanned the ground level again. I looked under the benches, behind the swing set, in the bushes near the slide exit. There was not a single soul. The park was dead silent. My friends slid down after me, panic in their eyes. "Where is he?" Tony asked. "There's no one," I said, my voice trembling. "There's literally no one here." It was impossible. A toddler couldn't have run away in the 2 seconds it took me to slide down. And even if they did, we would have seen them running across the open field. There was nowhere to hide. We stood there, huddled together at the bottom of the slide, our minds trying to process the impossible. And that's when it happened again. From inside the slide, the empty slide we had just come down, the voice returned, but the tone was different now. It wasn't just saying hello. It giggled, a wet, hollow, mocking giggle. And then it said, "Catch me." That broke us. It was like a scene from a horror movie. We didn't scream. We didn't discuss it. We just ran. We sprinted to our bikes, threw them upright and pedaled as if the devil himself was snapping at our heels. I don't think I've ever ridden that fast in my life. We didn't look back at the woods. We didn't look back at the playground. We just rode. We made it to my house in record time. We threw our bikes onto the lawn and ran into my backyard, collapsing onto the grass, gasping for air. We were terrified terrified, sweaty, and confused. We tried to keep our voices down because my dad was asleep inside, but we were frantic. "What was that?" Rob kept asking. "What the hell was that?" We sat there for a few minutes, trying to calm our racing hearts. We were just starting to catch our breath when we heard it. Knock, knock, knock. A gentle, rhythmic knocking on the backyard gate. My backyard is fully fenced with a high wooden fence. The gate opens to the side of the house, which leads to the street. Someone had followed us. I froze. "Who is that?" I called out, trying to sound tougher than I felt. Maybe it was my dad. Maybe a neighbor. An unfamiliar woman's voice drifted over the fence. "Hello?" My blood ran cold. It wasn't the child's voice, but the tone. It was off. She continued, "Were you boys just at the park?" We looked at each other in absolute horror. How could anyone know that? We had ridden so fast. No one on foot could have kept up with us. This was turning into a creepy experience that I couldn't explain. There was a tiny crack between the gate and the fence post, a sliver of space you could see through. I slowly, quietly crept toward the gate. I leaned in, putting one eye to the crack. I will never forget what I saw. It is an image that belongs in a creepypasta. Standing on the other side, bathed in the dim amber light of the street lamp, was a woman. She looked middle-aged, maybe in her 40s. She was wearing normal clothes. But her face, she was smiling. But it wasn't a normal smile. It was a wide, stretched, unnatural grin that showed too many teeth. It didn't reach her eyes. Her eyes were wide, unblinking, and this is the part that haunts me. She was looking directly into the crack. She wasn't looking at the gate. She was looking right at me, right into my eye, as if she knew exactly where I was standing. I stumbled back, gasping. "No," I choked out. "Sorry, wrong house." The woman didn't move. Her voice remained sickeningly sweet. "Are you sure?" Tony from behind me shouted, "No, we weren't. Go away." There was a long pause. I could feel her presence through the wood. "Okay," she said. "Thanks anyway." I waited a full minute. Then, trembling, I stepped back to the crack to see if she had left. She hadn't. She was still standing there, frozen, smiling that same horrible, wide smile, staring into the crack, waiting for me to look again. We didn't stay outside another second. We bolted into my house, locked the back door, locked the front door, and huddled in the living room with the lights on. My friends didn't go home that night. They were too scared to leave. We never went back to that park. To this day, I don't know what we heard in that slide, and I don't know who that woman was or how she followed us so fast. But I know one thing. She was hunting. You would think that after an experience like that, I would learn my lesson about being alone in the dark. You would think I'd stay away from parks forever. But time has a way of dulling fear. We grow up. We rationalize things. We tell ourselves that monsters aren't real and that haunted places are just stories. Fast forward to the summer of 2018. I was an adult now, living in a small suburban town. It was the kind of place where everyone knows everyone. A quiet community where safety was assumed, not questioned. It was a Friday night. I had just finished a brutal shift at work and my head was pounding. I didn't want to go straight home to a stuffy apartment. I wanted fresh air. I wanted to clear my head. There was a local park a few blocks from my place. It was different from the one in my childhood, more open, well lit with with street lamps along the main paved paths. I used it frequently for jogging. It was around 9 p.m. The sun had set an hour ago, but the park lights created pools of illumination along the trail. I put my headphones in, playing music at a low volume, and started walking. At first it was peaceful, the smell of freshly cut grass, the cool summer breeze. It was exactly what I needed. There were a few other people around, a couple walking a golden retriever, some teenagers laughing on a distant bench. I felt safe. But as I looped around the back section of the path, the atmosphere changed. The crowd thinned out. The laughter faded. I noticed a man sitting on a bench ahead of me. He was solitary. He was wearing a dark gray hoodie with the hood pulled tight over his head. It was July. It was warm. The hoodie didn't make sense. He was sitting perfectly still, hands in his pockets, staring straight ahead. As I walked past him, staying on the far side of the path, I felt that primal prickle on the back of my neck. You know the feeling, the biological alarm system that tells you you're being watched. It's a sixth sense we all have during mysterious encounters. I glanced sideways. He hadn't turned his head. His body was still facing forward, but his eyes were slid all the way to the corner, locked onto me. He was tracking me. This was the beginning of a real stalker horror story. I tried to brush it off. Don't be paranoid, I told myself. It's just a guy in a hoodie. Maybe he's cold. Maybe he's shy. I kept walking, but my senses were heightened now. I turned the volume down on my music until it was silent. I listened. Scuff, scuff, scuff. Footsteps behind me. They were soft rubber soles on pavement, but they were there. I stopped abruptly, pretending to tie my shoe. The footsteps stopped instantly. My heart rate kicked up a notch. I stood up and started walking again, a little faster this time. Scuff, scuff, scuff. The footsteps resumed, matching my new pace perfectly. Okay, this wasn't a coincidence. I decided to test him. There was a fork in the path ahead. The main path continued straight, toward the exit, but there was a smaller, dimmer trail that cut through a wooded section and looped back to the street. I took the sharp turn onto the wooded trail. I walked a few paces, then stopped and whipped my head around. The man from the bench had stood up. He was at the fork. He turned onto the trail. He wasn't jogging. He wasn't walking casually. He was moving with a terrifying, deliberate slowness. His head was down, his hands in his pockets, gliding toward me. He didn't care that I saw him. He didn't look away. Panic began to rise in my chest. I pulled out my phone and held it to my ear. "Yeah, I'm just around the corner, I see you," I said loudly to no one, pretending I had friends nearby. The man didn't react. He kept coming. I realized then that he wasn't afraid of being seen. He wasn't afraid of my fake phone call. He was focused entirely on closing the distance between us. I broke into a jog. Behind me, the rhythm of his footsteps changed. He was jogging too. I started to run. He started to run. It wasn't a race anymore, it was a hunt. I sprinted. I didn't care about looking cool or dignified. I ran with everything I had toward the street exit. The sound of his heavy boots hitting the pavement behind me was getting closer. I burst out of the tree line and onto the main sidewalk under the bright yellow glare of the streetlights. There were cars driving by. People were around. I spun around, chest heaving, ready to fight or scream. The path behind me was empty. I looked back toward the darkness of the park. He had stopped. He was standing right at the edge of the light where the shadows of the trees met the pavement. A dark silhouette in a gray hoodie. He stood there for a moment, just watching me catch my breath. Then slowly, he stepped backward into the darkness and vanished. I walked home, constantly looking over my shoulder. I locked my door, drew the blinds, and sat in the dark. I told myself it was just a creep, a one-time thing, but I was wrong. It wasn't over. A few days later, I went back to the park in broad daylight. I wanted to reclaim my space. I walked to the bench where he had been sitting. It was empty, but carved into the wood of the backrest, rough and jagged, were scratches. They looked fresh. I couldn't read words, but the anger in the carvings was palpable. I took a picture and left. And then the paranoia set in. I started seeing him everywhere. A shadow in the alleyway near my apartment, a figure standing across the street at 2 a.m. I stopped going out at night, but 2 weeks later, I thought I was being ridiculous. I went for a jog, again, sticking to the main road this time, refusing to enter the park. As I ran past the perimeter of the park, I looked into the tree line. There he was, standing just inside the woods, barely visible among the trunks. Same hoodie, same stillness. He was facing the road, facing me. He had been waiting there for weeks, waiting for me to come back. I sprinted to my car and drove away. I never walked near that park again. I never saw his face, and I never heard his voice. But the feeling of his eyes on me, that never went away. That real stalker changed me. It made me realize that predators don't just exist in movies. They exist in our neighborhoods, waiting in the periphery of our vision. But the most terrifying experience of my life, the one that made me fear for my life in a violent, immediate way, happened just recently. This event is fresh. The details are sharp and jagged in my memory. It was late, around 11 p.m. on a Friday night. I was with a group of friends, 5 of us in total. We were all guys, all in our early 20s, all over 6 feet tall. We were a group that nobody would typically mess with. We felt safe in our numbers. We were hanging out at a popular spot in our city called The Overlook. It's a high point in a public park that offers a great view of the downtown skyline. It's usually crowded with teenagers and couples. We were just chilling, leaning against our cars, when one of my friends, Mike, mentioned he had something in his trunk. "I've got Roman candles," he said with a grin. "Let's light them off." Now, the Overlook was too crowded for fireworks. We didn't want to hit anyone or get the cops called on us, so I suggested we move to a different spot. "Let's go to the Loop," I said. The Loop is a specific section of the park about a mile away. It's isolated. Essentially, it's a massive cul-de-sac surrounded by dense, unmanaged forest. The driveway to get there is long, winding, and cuts through a thick tree line, so once you're in the Loop, you are completely hidden from the main roads. It's a dead end. It sounded perfect for blowing off some steam. We thought we were just going to have some harmless fun. We piled into 2 cars and drove over. As we turned onto the winding road leading to the Loop, the streetlights disappeared. It was pitch black, the headlights cutting through the trees like knives. We decided to park our cars just outside the entrance of the Loop on a side street. The idea was that if we made a mess with the fireworks, our cars wouldn't be right next to the evidence. Smart, we thought. We started walking down the long driveway into the cul-de-sac. The air was heavy. As we walked deeper into the isolation, I started to notice things that felt off. It was one of those eerie stories coming to life where your gut tells you to leave, but your brain ignores it. There were cars parked in the cul-de-sac, not just 1 or 2. There were maybe 3 or 4 vehicles scattered around the perimeter of the loop. But they were dark. No interior lights, no headlights, no engines running. Just dark shapes sitting in the shadows of the trees. It was strange for 11:30 at night. Usually if people are here, they are hanging out, playing music, talking. This was silent. It felt like a graveyard. We ignored it. We were 6 big guys. We were arrogant. We walked to the center of the grassy area in the middle of the loop. Suddenly a truck engine roared to life. It came from the far side of the loop. It was a small, beat-up pickup truck. It didn't turn its headlights on. It rolled slowly out of its parking spot and started driving around the circle, moving toward us. We watched it, confused. The truck passed us, still dark. It drove to the entrance of the loop, blocking our exit, and then pulled a U-turn. It drove back toward us. Then it did another U-turn. It was pacing us, like a shark circling in the water. "That's weird," Mike muttered. We huddled closer together. The truck finally stopped about 50 yards away, facing us. It sat there, idling in the dark. We couldn't see the driver. We couldn't see how many people were inside. We should have left right then. The red flags were waving violently, but we didn't want to look scared. Mike, in a moment of absolute stupidity or perhaps defiance, said, "Whatever, let's just light the fireworks and go." He pulled out a Roman candle and lit the fuse. Sparks shot into the air, bright green and red flashes illuminating the trees and the dark truck. It was a beautiful sight for exactly 3 seconds. Because the moment those sparks flew, the truck slammed on its high beams. Blinding white light flooded our vision. The engine roared, the tires screeched, and the truck didn't stay on the road, it jumped the curb. It was driving across the grass, straight at us. Chaos erupted. "Run!" I screamed. The truck was accelerating fast, bouncing over the uneven grass, closing the distance in seconds. Someone inside the truck laid on the horn, a long, continuous, aggressive blast that drowned out our shouts. We scattered like prey. We couldn't run back to the road because the truck was cutting us off. Our only option was the woods. These weren't nice hiking trails. This was wild, overgrown forest. We dove into the tree line. I hit a wall of thorns and bushes. I didn't care. I smashed through them, the branches tearing at my clothes and skin. I scrambled down a steep embankment, sliding in the dirt, and threw myself behind a massive, fallen log. I lay there, chest heaving, pressing my face into the decaying leaves. 2 of my friends had dived in near me, but the others had scattered in different directions. The truck slammed to a halt at the edge of the woods. Doors flew open. "Get them," a voice roared, a male voice, deep and angry. Beams of light cut through the trees. Flashlights. They had flashlights. And then, more car doors slammed. The other dark cars we had seen parked in the loop, they weren't empty. People were getting out of them too. They were joining the hunt. This wasn't just a pissed-off park ranger. This was a coordinated group. I peeked over the log. I saw 2 men descending the embankment into the woods, swinging flashlight beams back and forth. They were hunting us. Why? Because of a firework? No, that didn't make sense. The aggression was too high. They were waiting for something or someone, and we had interrupted them. Or maybe we were the entertainment in their own twisted, real horror game. I lay frozen for what felt like an eternity. I could hear their boots crunching on the dry leaves. I could hear them calling out to each other. "I think they went down the ravine," one shouted. "Check the bushes," another replied. I stopped breathing. The beam of a flashlight swept over the log I was hiding behind. If I moved an inch, if I coughed, if my phone rang, it was over. I didn't know if they had weapons, but the way they moved, the way they communicated, it felt like they were ready to hurt us. After about 15 minutes of terror, the voices started to recede. "Let's go! They're gone!" someone shouted. We heard the truck engine rev again. We watched the headlights back away from the tree line. The truck drove off, tires spinning on the asphalt. The other cars followed. Silence returned to the woods. We waited another 10 minutes just to be sure. Then, shaking and covered in dirt, we crawled out of our hiding spots. We regrouped in the center of the loop. We were missing 3 friends. Panic set in again. "We have to find them," I whispered. We crept through the dark, calling their names softly. Finally, we found them near the exit. They had hidden in a drainage ditch. One of my friends, Sam, looked pale. "I saw him," Sam whispered. "One of the guys from the truck. He ran right past me." "Did he see you?" I asked. "No, but he was holding something. It looked like a tire iron or a machete. It was long and metal. That was it. We needed to leave now." But our cars were parked outside the loop. We had to walk back up that long, dark driveway to get to them. We started walking, sticking to the shadows of the trees. We were about 50 feet from the exit when we froze. The truck. It was waiting. It was parked right at the entrance of the loop, engine idling, lights off. They knew we had to come out this way. They were waiting to ambush us. We dove back into the woods. There was no way we were walking past that truck. We spent the next hour fighting through the densest forest I have ever seen. We cut through brambles, waded through a muddy creek, and climbed fences. We circled around the entire park to get to the main road, bypassing the entrance where the truck was waiting. We finally popped out on the main street, a mile away from our cars. We had to sneak through the neighborhood back to our vehicles. When we finally got to our cars, we checked underneath them, checked the back seats, and then drove. We took every back road imaginable to make sure we weren't being followed. I don't know who those people were. I don't know what they were doing in the dark in the loop before we got there. Were they a gang? Cultists? Drug dealers? Or just psychopaths looking for victims? I'll never know. But I learned something that night. The woods aren't empty, and sometimes the monsters are. Just men in pickup trucks, waiting in the dark with the headlights off. I'm never going back to the loop, and if you're smart, you won't go into the woods at night either. This was, without a doubt, the true scary story that ended my love for the night. Thank you for listening to these stories. If you have ever had a strange experience in a park, let me know in the comments below. Stay safe and remember, sometimes the scariest things aren't ghosts. They're the people watching you from the shadows.